Hi, I'm Marc, and on this channel I talk about Brexit and UK politics. And today I have to come back to the wine topic that I already mentioned recently, and I mean wine without the H. The British government is planning to change the rules for partially dealcoholized wines, as you know. And as the BBC report shows, these can currently only be sold in Great Britain under names such as wine-based drink or something similar. This regulation is based on the EU legal status as of 2020. According to it, wine, with a few exceptions where 4.5% by volume is considered the minimum value, must contain at least 8.5% alcohol by volume in order to be marketed as such. In the future, the minimum alcohol content for all types of wine is to be reduced to 0% by volume in Britain. The EU had already reformed its rules in 2021 so that alcohol-free and alcohol-reduced wine products are now legally wine in all member states, but must bear the mandatory indication dealcoholized or partially dealcoholized. The products are at the lowest quality level, meaning they are not allowed to bear any indication of origin other than the country of manufacture, but they are not allowed to bear certain grape variety information. However, the EU reforms did not apply in Great Britain due to Brexit. In the United Kingdom, wine law is to be reformed beyond the alcohol-free issue. For example, the drink, let's call it drink piquette, which is not approved in the EU, is likely to be produced and sold, which is fermented grape residues and water and has a lower alcohol content. And according to the BBC, this should be possible by the end of this year. As Beverage Daily reports, the previous regulations on wine packaging based on EU law in 2020 are also to be abolished. For example, the requirement for special corks, handles and foil for sparkling wine, I mentioned it in my last video, in order to better meet market trends and avoid waste here. In the future, wines made from PV varieties should also be allowed to bear protected designations of origin. In addition, the previously banned blend of imported wines should be permitted. 7 years since the vote and nearly 3 years after its outcome came into effect, few would argue that Brexit has been an economic success, but apart from the inconvenience of longer queues at airports and hassles when buying goods online from the EU, the move has not had much impact on most British citizens' daily lives. Some will regret not being able to study, live and work on the European mainland as easily in the past, or to employ European workers in the UK. And musicians and other performers have also had issues, but these have not affected the vast majority of the populace. But economists will, of course, point to higher UK inflation, but the government has attributed to the pandemic and the conflict in Ukraine, but it's a lot of Brexit in there. Things are changing, however. The divergence in food standards has led to UK supermarket shoppers now find themselves buying products with not for sale in EU stickers, and now wine is becoming part of this picture. The British government took a first step in ploughing its own furrow by introducing a highly complex excise duty system linked to alcoholic volume. And this was almost universally opposed by the UK wine trade, who merely slowed its implementation. A set of recent measures removing EU regulation that stifle innovation and prevent the introduction of more efficient and sustainable practices, as they say, is to have a greater impact. Among these, some are unexceptionable. Makers of sparkling wines will be allowed to seal their bottles with alternatives to the mushroom-shaped closures and without any foil, as I said. So English examples could come with a crown cap, for example. However, given their super premium prices, few producers are likely to take advantages of this. Producers will now be allowed to print ABV as 0.1%, revealing, for example, that their wine has 13.3% alcohol rather than 13 or 13.5. This makes sense in the context of the new duty regime, but whether the stated figure will be any more accurate remains to be seen. And UK producers concerned by climate change may welcome greater freedom to use hybrid grapes, though the increasing popularity of PVs in Germany and Italy in particular suggests that this is questionable as a benefit of quitting the EU. And greater freedom over packaging, ending outdated protectionist rules, what they say, giving producers the freedom to use bottle shapes they could not previously use for their wines, could open the way to more environmentally friendly square bottles, for example, though one media suggestion that Britons will be able to buy Alsace wine in anything other than a flute seemed unlikely, given the rules on bottling in the region. Industry members at both ends of the chain will welcome the news that back labels will not have to reveal the name of the importer, but since the announcement was made shortly before this requirement was due to become mandatory, many will complain at the waste of time and money that was devoted in previous months to unnecessary printing and application. Thus far, there is little in these changes that will do much to change the UK wine landscape here. But there are some things that are likely to do just that, but from my point, not the good. Allowing the production of piquette is controversial, and historically, the practice of re-fermenting skins and possibly stalks from which wine has been pressed was associated with a cheap, low-strength and quite probably vinegary beverage for the poor. It was also a means of increasing yields and was used as such in Canada in the 1970s. And today, the word is still synonymous in France with bad, spoiled wine, and in its efforts to restrict European overproduction, the EU outlaws its production. And piquette has, however, developed a following among the natural wine fraternity in particular, and visitors to trendy New York wine bars are almost sure to come across it. I think it's yikes. But the same will soon be true in London, it seems, as the style becomes legal. But how will the piquette be labeled? This question is prompted by the most significant of the changes to UK legislation. EU rules stating that fermented grape juice with less than 8.5% should not be described as wine are being ditched now. And so wine that has been dealcoholized completely and had the color lost in the process replaced will, as it seems, legally fall under the same category as Romanée Conti, for example. And British importers will also be free to carbonate imported wine and to blend wines from several countries. Again, this is an extension rather than overturning of EU rules. Blending cheap French and Spanish wine is commonplace, which explains why the former country is such a big importer of bulk wine from the latter. But any such mixture has to be labeled as product of the European unity and cannot have the name of grape variety on its label. No blend of two or more non-EU country wines or of wines combining EU and non-EU grapes may be sold in the 27 countries. In Britain, however, it will, as it seems, be legal, for example, to blend French, Chilean and Hungarian Merlot. And even while in the EU, the UK has an ennobled history of doing this kind of thing with British wine produced by fermenting imported grape concentrate. There are buyers in the UK that will know certain broadlet drinks. They may not have a little idea that cheap liquid in their glass has nothing to do with grapes grown in Norfolk, for example, or any part of the British Isles. And British wine used to benefit from lower excise duty. But this is no longer the case, but that advantage will apply to imported bulk wine that is partly dealcoholized, blended, and generally tricked up to align with lower tax rates. So, since the new tax regime came into force, a growing number of wines with a declared ABV of 10% have appeared on retail shelves. They are taxed at $2.57 per 75 centiliter bottle, rather than the $3.20 that would be levied on a wine with 11.5% or more. And for the moment, that $3.20 figure would also apply to a wine at 13.5%, but unless the government changes its mind in early 2025, it will be subject to a tax of 346. Compared to this, or the 372 for 14.5% Australian or Californian red, to the 218 payable on a beverage whose strength has been reduced to 8.5%, or the zero tax leveled on a zero alcohol wine, this can be a big incentive for importers to become very creative. But how long before UK shoppers are offered a cheap fizz made from bulk Spanish stuff but carbonated in an English winery and smartly bottled with an English-sounding name like whatever? But UK wine professionals, at least some of whom apparently welcome these new moves, will claim that consumers will be free to make their own choice between real wine and beverages that have been engineered to accommodate a UK tax regime. And some, of course, will, but as anyone who has some awareness of food and drink across the world can confirm, the majority will continue to buy quickly and instinctively, picking up familiar names at the lowest prices. So prospects for multi-country 5% Pinot Grigio seems bright here. And these post-Brexit changes will now expose UK consumers to potentially underhand behavior from which those boring Brussels bureaucrats once protected them. And they will also help to dent Britain's already declining reputation as one of the centers of wine expertise and excellence. Because what we have to expect here is a lot of cheap stuff that has nothing to do with wine anymore. And honestly, drink that stuff out of boxes and it's just yikes. For someone who doesn't drink wine often, because whenever I drink wine, I want quality. And you can taste the quality. There are some things I just don't want to do. If it's just for getting busted on a student party, and believe me, I've been to some, then drink that cheap stuff just to get totally drunk. That's what it's good for. Expect some headache in the next day, but never mind. But if you drink wine with food or for the taste of it or with a good cigar or whatever, don't do that. And I will definitely stick to different sorts of wine, I can tell you. But if you want to know something else, the next video is right here in the end screen. I'll see you there. I'll be back.